I think it's no secret how popular Five Nights at Freddy's is and how it dominates pop culture to this day. Since its first release, it was able to keep its momentum up in the most surreal way, releasing 3 sequels in under a year. By 2015, Five Nights at Freddy's popularity was exploding. The game's lore was incredibly ambiguous, with no official narrative standing at the forefront. Instead, its unique identity was brought together by bits and pieces of storytelling. This puzzle piece method of lore would bring together a community of theorists that would skyrocket the popularity of the franchise. Following the release of Five Nights at Freddy's 3 on March 3rd, 2015, the month of April would feature 2 major news announcements, teasers for the 4th game that would release later that year, and the subject we will be focusing on today, the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. April 4th, 2015, Warner Bros. Picked up the rights to Scott Cawthon's video game franchise, most likely riding off the horror high that their movies The Conjuring and Annabelle had brought to the distributor. The movie was set to be produced by Roy Lee, Seth Grahame-Smith, and David Katzenberg. Radio silence would follow for a short while, a common trend we will see as we keep going through this timeline, until July 28th, 2015. Just a week after the release of the 4th FNAF game, Gil Kenan was announced as the director for the FNAF movie. Gil Kenan as a director stood out to me for multiple reasons. His art drew inspiration from the work of Steven Spielberg and Amblin. His graduate thesis, The Lark, was clearly influenced by early Hitchcock's work, alongside the storytelling methods of Edgar Allan Poe and a touch of eeriness that David Lynch had within his art. This short film would eventually be the turning point of his life, as he would be given the screenplay to Monster House. It's clear here that Gil Kenan had a passion for animation and practical effects, but despite that, he would continue landing live-action movies in his career moving forward. His next horror film after Monster House would be Poltergeist, a remake of a supernatural classic from the 80s. Comparing Monster House and Poltergeist, it was clear Gil Kenan had a knack for making horror stories that were perfect for a younger audience. And knowing how the FNAF community was at the time, assumingly this made him the perfect pick as a director. Following the announcement of his role, Gil Kenan would answer a few questions on his Twitter, establishing his attitude towards the movie, and the spirit that would be carried through production. He said he was a big fan of FNAF and admired Scott's ability to world build. When a user asked to aim the movie towards more than just the teen fans, Gil Kenan confidently replied,
"The lore of the game is the movie's fuel. I'm making this film for all the FNAF fans, not just kids."
When asked if Scott would be involved in the production, Gil Kenan made sure to emphasize he was, claiming when he first received the news that he would direct, he immediately called Scott.
"I made him a promise at the start of this, that I want him to be involved in a real way. Scott is FNAF."
After the announcement of Gil Kenan's directorial role, the community would be plagued with vague posts by Gil Kenan's Twitter for the next 2 years. July 28th, 2015 would be the start of a series of tweets where he would post a photo of a pair of animatronic eyes, captioned,
"Animatronic forever."
Right under the post, a user would ask what the movie would focus on specifically, in which Kenan replied with a simple,
"Not saying yet."
The way horror on the internet was approached in 2015 was far different than what we normally expect these days. I think because of the year is what allowed these posts to really spark an interest. The internet was used to horror stories, Photoshop, and found footage as a medium for their horror mythology. To see something like FNAF receive a Hollywood budget was unheard of, and fans were anxious about how the people part of the project would handle it. Because other than the animatronics, people were concerned how the story would be represented. With only 4 games to go off of, the Five Nights at Freddy's lore was still relying on its atmosphere and vague allusions to something bigger. Even with FNAF 4 containing the most lore out of the rest, there was only so much to dissect with the little context provided. And with being the most recent on people's minds, a lot of fans watched Kenan's posts like a hawk in hopes of getting some answers. The next post that would follow would be a day later, captioned with
"Classic teenage behavior."
From the picture displayed, we can see a young woman surrounded by some uncanny bunny mascot costumes. As expected, FNAF fans wondered if this was in any relation to the movie, most assuming this was some representation of Bonnie the Bunny. Of course, no answers would be received from Gil Kenan himself, but a little bit of effort in Google searching would lead you to the origin of the photo. From the Los Angeles Public Library photo collection, the photo would be titled, "Meet the Hostess." Photograph caption dated March 10th, 1964 reads,
"Posed amidst and dwarfed by huge Easter bunnies, Amanda Levent, daughter of wit pianist Oscar Levent, prepares for her duties as a hostess hostess at the Teenage Fair, due March 20th to 29th at the Hollywood Palladium.
A bit random, but I think we can rationalize at least some association with the movie. It's bunnies after all, and Bonnie is a bunny. Another day later, Accidental Bear would be posted. Staring at an open, decaying robotic jaw, a fan would directly ask,
"Are you reusing another animatronic for Freddy or something?"
In which Gil Kenan would respond,
"This is an image I took of an old and worn out animatronic puppet. Inspiration only, for now."
Okay, at least we're getting some context compared to last time. Surely this will be a reoccurring trend? August 1st and August 6th, 2015, he would post photos similar to classic teenage behavior. One of Smokey Bear with a group of children, probably teaching them all about wildlife prevention, and the other being a very welcoming and friendly looking Easter bunny, with two little girls who look incredibly charmed. Considering the animals, of course, FNAF fans couldn't help but draw association with our beloved Freddy Fazbear, and this time around Spring Bonnie, or Springtrap as most people would know him. The only thing fans would get from Gil Kenan is a cheeky reply under his Smokey Bear photo though, with a zoomed in version of it and the caption,
"Enhanced magnification times 1000.
Considering this sort of response, I do think this is like a direct poke or him just teasing the theorists who tend to soak up every detail of anything that's concerning FNAF. August 11th, the 14th, and 16th of 2015, Gil Kenan would post arcade-related photos. And as we all know how important arcades are to a pizzeria, this was still enough to keep the fans theorizing, associating this photo with Pirates Cove, and this photo here potentially being the aftermath of an animatronic attack. Not even a month since his directorial role was announced publicly, fans were already starting to be a little worn down by this series of fake posting. One user would even say,
"Man, stop teasing. Give us a really wonderful person. I love you."
This would be met without a reply, perhaps because the user was too abrasive, or perhaps because Gil Kenan was abashed by a random stranger telling him that they loved him. The next collection of photos that Gil Kenan would post over the span of a few days would make it clear that he was at the Jim Henson's Creature Shop. When it comes to reflecting back on this time, this photo in particular is what a lot of fans reminisce on, as people were convinced this was a behind-the-scenes look at a Foxy animatronic. Unbeknownst to most, this image and this one would actually be the corpses of characters from the 1991 Dinosaur Show. Okay, editing is strange here. I genuinely don't know where I got my sources on this when writing the script, but like, this is obviously not the image that Gil Kenan provided here. Like, you can tell by the teeth in here, like, this is just not a dinosaur animatronic. Like, it just does not look like that at all. It looks like, yeah, there's no resemblance there. So I'm like, what is this animatronic? Because I don't actually know much what is in Jim Henson's Creature Shop and what is not. Is it all existing animatronics? Is it all just prototypes? I've never been, I don't know. So my guess, though someone can correct me if I'm wrong, the most similar I saw was actually the Shaggy Dog animatronics. This is from the Stan Winston School of Character Arts, so I don't know the relationship with Jim Henson's Creature Shop and whether or not they would keep this in Jim Henson's Creature Shop. That being said, it does look a little more similar with the teeth there. But it's not an exact match, like, I will admit. I wish I could rotate this around to really see a more stripped down version, but like, just looking very closely at that, and then a bigger, yeah, this is like the most similar image I can get, and if I could just like rotate it around and kind of match it, I guarantee you it won't be an exact match. But I don't actually know where this Foxy image is from. Like, if someone has the answer, please leave it in the comments, because now I'm just curious. But that did not stop people from spreading this quote-unquote Foxy image like wildfire. I distinctly remember seeing this photo for the first time in 2015. This image alongside that fake Fazbear location on Google Maps and that photoshopped image of that one animatronic from the Rock of Fire explosion haunted me, alongside my already present fear of Slender Man, so that's just fun. That was a fun combination there. Somewhere out there on an abandoned Android, there's a video of me alongside my brother when we were like 11 years old and some other kids running around at night, and we were like Slender Man hunting. So that puts in perspective what I was doing back in 2015. The next batch of images wouldn't be much to know other than something potentially religious to tie in with the franchise. I mean, we all know that Scott Cawthon is pretty religious, but FNAF itself has kind of just not really touched that much, other than, like, I guess the concept of heaven very recently in the FNAF 2 movie, but that's not related to what we're talking about right now. A picture of a prize center would be posted with the caption,
Boardwalk Vampire.
This would be a direct reference to The Lost Boys from 1987, and an endearing photo of Gil Kenan's girlfriend Linda would also be posted, in which someone anxiously replied,
"Oh gosh, please don't say this animatronic will appear in the FNAF movie. If yes, the FNAF movie's not a FNAF movie?"
In which Gil Kenan heroically responded,
This is a window display animatronic from a department store in 1935.
Marking the third month since his announcement as a director, September 3rd, 2015, Gil Kenan would post a photo of a bunny mascot and a distressed child with the caption of,
That one eye.
The next batch of posts would remain as vague as ever, but have a consistent aesthetic that ran parallel with FNAF's. Pinball Hazard, September 5th, 2015, Good Shirt, Bad Advice, September 12th, 2015, Video Surveillance Party, September 14th, 2015, and Robotic Animals, September 16th, 2015. From this collection, it's easier to put together a scene of what this might imply in a FNAF 2015 context. Perhaps footage got leaked of a potential break-in in the Fazbear location, but the intruders got attacked by something not seen on the camera. Again, pure speculation, but it does hold some ground when we actually expand on it in a later section of this video. Insert human being, September 17th, 2015, C is for Crush, September 22nd, 2015, and keep an eye on this one, September 29th, 2015. Seemingly another visit to the Jim Henson's Creature Shop, Gil Kenan would share photos of different animatronic parts. In Wild Stretch, this photo seems to be a light reference to Springtrap, and I think this photo here is a stripped-down animatronic from the Dark Crystal. October 5th, 2015, the most interesting out of all the photos shared so far would be posted.
Only one survived.
Despite all implications seemingly screaming this post was related to FNAF, it instead had much darker undertones. Taken from the archives of the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, a major daily newspaper published by the Hearst Corporation from 1962 to 1989, this photo was captured by Leo Jarzom. Dated March 4th, 1988, the photograph caption reads,
Stuffed animal sits secure amid shattered glass after owner was thrown through car's sunroof. The driver, a 31-year-old Los Angeles resident, was driving his 1987 Nissan Maxima south on the Long Beach Freeway near Washington Boulevard in Commerce when he drifted to the right and struck the rail. He flew out of the sunroof, traveled about 35 feet, then landed down into a chain link fence. Unlike his stuffed passenger, the driver was not buckled in and died at the scene.
October 13th, 2015, Servo Junkies Anonymous was posted. Seemingly another photo from Jim Henson's Creature Shop, fans were quick to draw the caption in relation with the first phone call you get from the original Five Nights at Freddy's game.
They're left in some kind of free roaming mode at night. Something about their servos locking up if they get turned off for too long.
The Neighborhood Kids Love My Costume, October 27th, 2015, Annival, October 29th, 2015, we would get some carnival-themed photos shared, really putting the mascot in mascot horror. I Have No Bones, November 8th, 2015, appeared to be a close-up view of a broken animatronic. Chuck E. Cheese, 9:02 p.m., December 7th, 2015. I do not have much to say about this, but I am going to play the video just because of how weird and eerie it is. Arcades Are Not for Babies, December 22nd, 2015. We see a toddler on the ground, seemingly taking a tumble after all that Fazbear excitement. While Gil Kenan continued his vague posting for the holiday season, the next major development within the FNAF franchise would be the release of The Silver Eyes on December 17th, 2015. This would be the book that put a name to the ever-popular purple guy within the series, William Afton. We would also be introduced to Henry Emily, but his importance in the games wouldn't be shown until 2 years later. Even with The Silver Eyes being its own separate canon, it still paralleled the mainline games and recontextualized everything theorists had been working up with until this point. So with that in mind, the expectations for the FNAF movie had definitely changed, at least for the people who actually read the books. There is a different perspective of the story now present, and now there's many ways to approach the movie narratively. And it was clear this provided some conflict, as on December 21st, 2015, Scott Cawthon confirmed the script for the FNAF movie was still being worked on. March 11th, 2016, Gil Kenan would post on his Instagram,
"Left without comment."
with Warner Brothers Entertainment tagged to a photo of him standing in a hallway holding a large teddy bear. On March 27th, 2016, he would post on Twitter,
"Hold my baby."
marking his last post with any sort of resemblance to the aesthetic themes of FNAF for the next year. It would take nearly a year for any major news about the FNAF movie to come out. Approaching 2 years after its announcement, the production behind the film was being kept secret, with little progress being known. January 31st, 2017 would be the first major announcement concerning the state of the movie, and it would be shared from Scott Cawthon himself.
Hey guys, I know that I promised some movie news by the end of the month, so here it is. However, keep in mind that there are still some very important discussions in progress, so the amount of information that I can share is extremely limited. In fact, even the information that I can share will have to remain somewhat cryptic. The reality is that last year, the FNAF movie was met with several delays and roadblocks, some involving problems within the movie industry as a whole. As a result, as of right now, the movie is back at square one. However, depending on your point of view, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's bad because the movie is in its early stages again, so don't expect a trailer anytime soon. But it's good because I want to make sure that the right movie gets made, and things are on the right track right now for that to happen. I'm going to be involved with the movie from day one this time, and that's something extremely important to me. I want this movie to be something that I'm excited for the fan base to see, so there you have it. I know that this news might come as a disappointment to some, but there are going to be a lot of great things happening in 2017.
I'm also going to be involved with the movie from day one this time. This statement directly contradicts what we had seen prior when Gil Kenan's directorial debut had been announced. Gil Kenan had emphasized he had made a promise to Scott Cawthon for his involvement, stating, "Scott is FNAF." And yet, that seemed to fall through considering what Scott had shared on his Steam posts. We can speculate all we want, but unfortunately there just isn't anything else to go off other than taking Scott Cawthon's word for it. Regardless, assumedly, Warner Brothers was not the ideal studio for FNAF, and that would be proven on March 28th, 2017. On Scott's official Twitter account, he posted a tweet confirming the rights had been dropped by Warner Brothers and grabbed by Blumhouse Productions, with Jason Blum set to produce. For the most part, it would be radio silence, something a lot of people were already used to, but this time around, Jason Blum would occasionally drop bits and pieces about the project.
It's kind of horror, but I'm really excited about that. I've been working with Scott Cawthon on trying to turn that into a movie. I'm really pleased about that. That game has a rabid fan base, and I would say without Scott, it wouldn't make a good movie, but I think Scott has a very clear idea of what he wants the movie to be, and I think because we're using the same creator as the game in Scott, I think there'll be a great movie in it. I think if it weren't for that, I'd be skeptical about a Five Nights movie. I think very rarely. Now, when have you seen a remake of a video game that was very closely overseen by the person who created the video game? We're going to take a different approach, and I have faith it'll work out.
A few months later, when asked about his involvement, Gil Kenan confirmed he had departed from the movie on June 22nd, 2017.
"Sadly correct. Love FNAF in the community, and hoping for a great film."
While there is no official confirmation, I have to assume his post on Instagram from a year prior might have been when he left the project. It's clear the early production history was kept under tight wraps, considering the lack of information and what Scott has stated. They were still writing scripts, meaning the actual production of the movie still hadn't started, so what the hell were Gil Kenan's posts? These had been the only lifeline FNAF fans were given about the movie, and yet they didn't seem to have any actual association of what Gil Kenan's FNAF movie was supposed to be. These Twitter posts were the reason why I wanted to make this video in the first place. It's what I think back on when it comes to my earliest memories of the FNAF movie. These circulated like wildfire when they were initially posted, and yet the truth was they had nothing to do with the movie, and fans had deluded themselves to believe so. So what were they? In September 2021, in an interview where Gil Kenan discussed the production of Monster House, he unveiled some of his creative processes and how he made decisions.
"The film was inspired by Wisconsin, Minneapolis, just the prototypical cinematic American Midwest, Northern Midwest neighborhood. And so I just immersed myself in photographs and in film of the area."
This is the answer to his quote-unquote FNAF posts. They were the simple result of him exploring environments and finding archived news articles and photos to draw inspiration for the movie. And that becomes increasingly evident when you see what year most of the photos he shared were dated. Albeit a lame answer, and considering considering how Gil Kenan purposely posted vague things to stir a reaction from the Five Nights at Freddy's community, this seems to be the truth. When it comes to the production of movies and TVs, you can't move forward till a script is finalized, as that is the blueprint of your story. So in the meantime, it seemed Gil Kenan was seeking the FNAF's movie's visual style, as we would eventually see how some of his posts did parallel the scrap scripts that Scott would eventually share later. On February 12, 2018, it was announced that Chris Columbus was set to write and direct the FNAF movie. Known for his projects such as Gremlins and the first 2 Harry Potter movies, this proposed an interesting take on the movie that was a bit different from Gil Kenan's assumed vision. Nearly 3 years after the film's announcement, FNAF's identity had changed significantly, a far cry from what it was initially in 2015. With now 7 games and a book trilogy under its belt, there was a lot more of a story for fans to work with, making expectations higher than the traditional Survive the Night plot. Like before, after the announcement of Chris Columbus's involvement, there wouldn't be any major news for a couple months. Jason Blum would be the first to disrupt the silence when asked what the speculated release date for the movie would be, in which he replied, "My guess, and just a guess, 2020. This response implied that the FNAF movie was on a much better track compared to its Warner Brother era, but considering we know when the movie actually came out, that was not the case. Fast forward a few months, on November 12, 2018, we would receive direct news from Scott Cawthon himself. In a Steam post, Scott Cawthon would write out major announcements for the FNAF franchise overall as it continued to grow bigger and bigger, including a movie update in which he revealed that the wrapped up and greenlit script had been scrapped.
I had a script written, Jason liked it, and Chris Columbus liked it too, but I tossed it. I had a different idea for it, one that I liked better. I take responsibility for this delay. It's my fault. I'm sticking to what I've always said. Either the right movie gets made, or no movie gets made. I hate delaying a project that's already seen so many delays, but I have to go with my instincts on what I think will be exciting and interesting, and what I think the fan base will really want to see. If that means that I have to start over 10 more times, then that's what I'm gonna do. The good thing is that each attempt gets better and better, in my opinion. So, despite the delays, it's going in the right direction.
Scott Cawthon emphasized within the Steam post that the movie he was making would only take into account the context of the first 3 games. And while only referring to it as FNAF's upcoming AAA game at the time, Scott Cawthon was actively juggling the production of the FNAF movie and Security Breach when he had written that post. June 19, 2020, we would get a brief update from Jason Blum. Asked by a fan for any news about the movie, Blum noted, "We have been working on it for a long time," while adding that the film's development status is super active, so I really feel like we have a very good shot at getting to see a Five Nights at Freddy's movie. I feel like it's really moving forward. It's not stalled or anything else. It might seem that way because we haven't done any announcements about it, but it's not stalled. It's moving rapidly forward, and I don't want to put a timeline on it, but soon we'll get a movie. I really feel confident about it. Several months later, November 20th, 2020, Scott Cawthon published a Reddit post with the caption, "Bad news about the FNAF movie," in which he gave a rundown of the history of FNAF's screenplay. Within this post, we would be shown 9 ideas that had eventually been scrapped, before mentioning the 10th one, labeled the Mike screenplay. Scott Cawthon cheekily concluded, "The bad news is that there won't be any more screenplays to add to this list since we're officially making the Mike screenplay. Filming starts in spring." I'm only going to briefly touch on this right now because we will expand on this in a later section of the video, but skimming over these scrap screenplays, I was surprisingly able to draw some parallels with what we saw Gil Kenan post, even if the photos themselves really had nothing to do with Five Nights at Freddy's overall. Regardless, the screenplay post would exemplify how messy and chaotic the production of this movie was, and that would be further proven on September 29th, 2021.
On Twitter that I was going to be talking to you, and when I mentioned to my staff, something that came up a number of times was Five Nights at Freddy's. Everyone kept on being like, "What's going on with that?" So I'm asking you, what's going on with that?
It's really tough to crack. We've written multiple scripts, and we're threading a needle, which is doing justice to Five Nights at Freddy's and making Scott happy. The only way that we would go about it is giving Scott, I don't want to do something that Scott doesn't like. Or in fact, but let me say that a different way. I don't have the right to do anything Scott doesn't like. Scott has kind of like the equivalent of Final Cut. And it's taken longer than I hoped to find, to get the right story. But we're a long ways from giving up, and I'm confident eventually I will figure it out.
Is Chris Columbus still attached?
Chris Columbus is no longer attached.
Do you have a filmmaker on it, or is it? Can you share?
That is classified information.
I'll leave it alone.
Nearly a year after his Reddit post, we once again are faced with contradicting information shared from Scott and the people he worked with. He had claimed they would start filming in spring, and yet that very evidently didn't become the case. So what exactly happened? What was wrong with the Mike screenplay they settled on that ultimately led to even further delay? Once again, we can only go on speculation, but my personal theory is that it had to do with Chris Columbus, considering his abrupt absence. Despite his Harry Potter movies being some of his highest regarded projects, what people tend to forget is that Chris Columbus had also directed the 2010 Percy Jackson films, notoriously known as some of the worst book-to-film adaptations to date. The author of the Percy Jackson books, Rick Riordan, had wrote a lengthy blog post about his consistent conflict with the film's producers as they made drastic changes to his story and refused to listen to him. The contract of the film left him with little say over the movie adaptation, resulting in 2 movies that were derivative from his original vision and failing as a blockbuster franchise. Despite Chris Columbus and Scott Cawthon settling on something together, it seems that during the production, these two would have creative conflicts, resulting in Chris Columbus's eventual departure.
On Freddy's, we are dangerously close. I will say that we are dangerously close. I'm just saying we're dangerously close to more news. Dangerously close.
Okay. Despite not seeing what they could offer to the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, Gil Kenan and Chris Columbus had left big shoes to fill for the directorial role. Scott Cawthon needed someone versatile, someone who would meet him at his level and respect his creative decisions overall. It was clear through Jason Blum why him and Scott made such a good pair. Despite the executive control Jason could have over the movie, he was incredibly mindful of Scott Cawthon's creative ways and ultimately let him have the final say in everything. Jason Blum would approach Tammi one day discussing what the FNAF movie was at the time. Here, he would outline the general idea of FNAF and what they were currently working with, before directly proposing this project to Tammi and putting her in touch with Scott Cawthon. After her conversation with Blum, Tammi would begin her research into FNAF, starting with the games and quickly sinking neck deep into its lore. She became fascinated with the community culture for FNAF and was quick to learn how important theories were to Five Nights at Freddy's overall. She would approach the franchise on a pure level, discussing with Scott the existing script they already had and being attentive to what he wanted. They would both come together at different perspectives and were overall respectful of each other and acknowledging their strengths creatively. What Tammi brought to the table would be a perfect fit and finally get the production of the FNAF movie moving forward. Her director role would be publicly announced on October 5th, 2022, finally putting this development hell to rest.
In meeting with Emma, I felt she had a great understanding of the franchise and really felt that she could craft something that would please the fan base and keep people on the edge of their seats.
Despite the limited information we were given, we can ultimately assume that the FNAF movie we got was a heavily revised version of the Mike screenplay mentioned on Scott Cawthon's Reddit post from 2020. But what were the other screenplays, and were any of these being worked on when Gil Kenan was on the project? Well, despite the tons of speculating that has already been done in this video, there is an answer, albeit not entirely direct, which really keeps the theme of this entire discussion. Before getting to that though, I think it's important to cover what Scott Cawthon did share with the community.
Hi everyone. Before we get to the bad news concerning the state of the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, I wanted to share a brief history of the FNAF screenplay. It's been a long road, so let's take a look at some of these screenplays that have come and gone over the years, in no particular order. Or you can feel free to skip to the end really quick and see the bad news, then come back and enjoy the list. Some of these came from big studios, some from big directors, some from me, and some from other hired writers. I gave the screenplays a name, and I'll include a brief synopsis as well as what ultimately led to each screenplay being rejected. The F screenplay. Basic setup: group of teenage troublemakers break into Freddy's and chaos ensues. Problems. Although a pretty basic setup, there were a lot of odd choices here, which only got weirder as the story continued. The story ended with our protagonist in a secret underground animatronic factory that was designing robots for the government. Verdict. Strayed way too far from the source material. Tossed. The Plushies Take Manhattan screenplay. Basic setup: Plushies take Manhattan. Problems. Plushies took Manhattan. Verdict: burned with fire. The Random Charlie screenplay. Basic setup: Charlie and friends sneak into Freddy's after hours to retrieve a lost toy. Problems. Although sharing names of familiar characters from the series, these characters had nothing to do with their game and book counterparts. So while featuring familiar elements of the games, it seemed too loosely based on the game and lost a lot of its impact because of it. Verdict. Felt like a random bag of FNAF elements with no real stakes. Meh. The Silver Eyes screenplays. Basic setup. Kira and I both worked on 3 versions of a Silver Eyes screenplay over the course of about a year, trying to find the right approach to the story from the first book. Problems. These were the first attempts I made at writing a screenplay, and after realizing it was going to be difficult to find someone else who understood the lore well enough to do it. Unfortunately, it also meant these screenplays suffered greatly from my inexperience at writing. Even Kira, with her writing expertise, couldn't save them. Verdict. Although these had some good elements, I ultimately decided to focus on making a screenplay from the games and not the books. The Pawn Shop screenplay. Basic setup. A kid who watches after a pawn shop finds trouble when an animatronic is brought in. Turns out Freddy's had been robbed, and the animatronics were taken to different locations for sale. The other animatronics come to retrieve the one at the pawn shop, and the kid and his friends get roped into adventure. Problems. Creative approach, but felt a little too much like Boy and his animatronic. Too much after-school adventure, not enough horror. Verdict. It seemed like a good idea at the time. The Cassidy screenplay. Basic setup. Diving deep, this screenplay packed in a lot of lore following the story of Cassidy. Problems. Spanning multiple time periods, following multiple characters, and featuring lore from multiple games, this was pretty saturated. Saturated to a fault. It may have been satisfying to the most hardcore fans, but it would have left the majority of people confused and lost. Hey, wait, maybe this was the most accurate screenplay. Verdict. Ultimately more of a visual encyclopedia than a movie. This just wasn't satisfying, even to me. Out. The Misfit Kid screenplay. Basic setup. A single mom brings her kid to a new town. Kid find Freddy's. Hilarity ensues. Problems. One of the problems in creating a modern-day story with an old Freddy setting is finding a way to connect the protagonists to the restaurant, finding a reason for them to be there, and finding a reason for them to stay. The problem here was that the reason for this kid to go to Freddy's and have misadventures was too contrived and too forced. Verdict. Not a bad setup, but it just didn't work. If I don't care about these characters, then there's a good chance no one else will either. Pass. This was going to be the screenplay for a while because it didn't have any serious flaws. I ultimately just decided it wasn't good enough. The Ghost Trackers screenplay. Basic setup. A group of amateur ghost trackers sneak into the abandoned Freddy's. Problems. Although a very common sense setup for this sort of movie, the problem again arose about how to give these characters a connection to Freddy's itself. What ended up happening was too much of the story went to their own backstories and their own hardships, and it took the spotlight away from the stories of Freddy's. Verdict. A stronger connection between the protagonist and Freddy's was needed. Lesson learned. The Insane screenplay. Basic setup. Another Ghost Tracker variation. This one involved the Funtime animatronics, underground ball pit tunnels, and a marionette out for revenge. Problems. As some other screenplays ventured too far into adventure, this one went too far into action. Verdict. It's too all over the place with too many characters doing too many things. The Mike screenplay. Basic setup. This makes sense. Why didn't I think of this before? Problems. Actually, this is a good mix. It has the best pieces of all the previous screenplays. Not really any problems here. All the right characters, all the right motivations, all the right stakes. Verdict. Yeah, we're going with this one. It's fun, it's scary, and it has a great central story. Oh, right. So, on to the bad news. The bad news is that there won't be any more screenplays to add to this list since we're officially making the Mike screenplay. Filming starts in spring! Yippee!
Starting with the F screenplay, what initially seemed like a normal setup took an insane twist unexpectedly. With the whole secret underground animatronic facility part towards the end, the photos that Gil Kenan posted can only make me think of the multiple images he shared within Jim Henson's Creature Shop. Insert human being, C is for crush, and I have no bones are some of the photos that immediately jump out to me when it comes to the screenplay. Obviously, we don't know exactly when the script was written, and the photos mentioned can be applied to the aesthetic of FNAF in general. It's hard to make concrete conclusions. The concept of breaking into a Fazbear location exists within the other scripts, including what we ended up seeing in the actual movie. The only difference here is that Freddy Fazbear is working with the US government, and although this pizzeria franchise may love capitalism, I would like to believe the military is far from their mind. I think if FNAF had come out a decade prior, the screenplay would work more, considering early 2000 movies were already flirting with crazy ideas left and right, but it definitely makes sense why this was abandoned. On to the next. The Plushies Take Manhattan screenplay is pretty self-explanatory, and I don't have much to say other than agreeing that the script deserved to be shredded into pieces. Gil Kenan's posts don't imply anything towards the screenplay either, other than maybe only one survived, but we're saving that for a better screenplay. So how about I let Scott Cawthon take it away from here and give his own opinions?
But yeah, I've seen some interesting things, and I'm going to try to be really careful, you know, not to sound critical of some of the ideas that have I've seen, because like I said, there were a lot of challenges to writing a script for this, even for me, because there's just so much information. But there are some things that I'm really glad never made it. And one of them being that something that I actually heard on, I think it was a Matt Pat on a live stream, was musing about bad ideas that could potentially happen in a Five Nights at Freddy's movie. And one of the ones that he just brushed off and laughed about was the idea of plush toys coming to life. And I heard that, and that's another time where I wanted to jump in and say something, but I knew that I couldn't, because that is something that actually could have happened. It wasn't a full-blown script, but somebody had that idea and could have implemented it, and there wouldn't have been a whole lot that I could have done about it at the time. So that's a scary thought, and that's kind of the risk, of not really understanding a franchise really well, and then trying to come up with something that's I don't know, that would have been really bad. Yeah, I heard him mention that comment on his live stream. I was thinking to myself, you have no idea that actually almost happened. That specific idea, plush toys coming to life and taking over Manhattan, that actually almost happened.
The Random Charlie screenplay refers to the story that used characters from the games in Silver Eyes trilogy, except they had nothing to do with their stories respectively, and more were just borrowing their names. There isn't an age group specified, but I assume Charlie and friends were teenagers who go on a fetch quest for a toy that a younger kid lost. I feel like the animatronic and pizzeria photos from Gil Kenan can be connected back, but that can be said for most of these screenplays. The video of inside a Chuck E. Cheese pops out to me for the screenplay, alongside the random photos of kids Gil Kenan posted. Considering the plot seems to entail a fetch quest, this seems like something that could only take place within one night, instead of, 5 nights at Freddy's. Considering Scott said the screenplay was a random bag of FNAF elements, I feel like the main purpose was equivalent to jingling keys in front of the fans. The Silver Eyes screenplay would have adapted the book trilogy. As someone who's only read the first book, I personally believe this is still something that can be worked into a feature film. Admittedly, this feels more like Blumhouse's style versus what we ended up getting. Blumhouse is True for Dare, The Gallows, Squeegee. The Silver Eyes story slips in with the rest. A female protagonist, a group of teenagers, and an external force putting them through the horrors. Obviously, there's more to it, but this video is already exceeding its planned length, and the plot of The Silver Eyes gets crazier as the books continue. But looking at it from the first installment, it genuinely is a perfect candidate for a feature-length film. There's nothing from Gil Kenan I wanted to connect this back to, but I still wanted to touch on it real quick to make this point. Maybe one day in the future we will see a film or TV adaptation of these books. The pawn shop screenplay makes a particular image from Gil Kenan pop out to me. Revisiting his girlfriend Linda, he had mentioned he had seen her in a display window for an old department store. I have a nagging feeling that the screenplay was specifically considered during the movie's Warner Brother era, and I will explain why. The plot entails the animatronics being stolen from Freddy's, one specifically landing in the protagonist's pawn shop before the others come to collect them. An adventure ensues. Scott referred to this as a boy and his animatronic trope, which really means a boy and his dog, or specifically in this case, a boy and his alien. In the same interview where the production of Monster House was discussed, towards the start, Gil Kenan expressed his love for 80s films, as that was what really defined his filmmaking journey. Steven Spielberg stood at the heart and center when it came to inspiration, and one of the biggest movies he's famous for is E.T. This massive blockbuster set in motion a number of movies with the same trope: a kid, an alien, and the magic of friendship. So imagine one of these movies, but with an animatronic instead. Definitely an idea that was pretty alright in concept, but too outdated and wasn't going to connect with the FNAF audience. Also, to have a movie where the pizzeria isn't the main setting just feels too criminal. The Cassidy screenplay takes on a non-linear narrative that is packed to the brim with lore. When discussing these abandoned scripts, the screenplay is brought up a ton within the FNAF community, simply because of the involvement of Cassidy, the kid spirit that possesses Golden Freddy. While obviously the most hardcore FNAF fans would love a movie like this, it didn't work by itself and wouldn't have been digestible for audiences who were being exposed to the franchise for the first time. Alongside being the most commonly talked about scrapped screenplay, there's one Gil Kenan post that always makes its rounds within the conversation. Only one survived. I already discussed the actual context behind this photo earlier in this video, but considering this caption, it was hard for fans not to connect it back to Cassidy. There are a lot of debates and theories surrounding this character alone, but it is universally agreed how significant Cassidy is to the overall FNAF narrative. Out of all the screenplays within this post, there was a portion of fans that connected the script to Gil Kenan. Considering the non-linear storytelling method in the post Gil Kenan shared, it's easy to see why people would think that. It's indirect, it's confusing, it It requires a lot of critical thinking. It's very much Five Nights at Freddy's. But that's what made it a poor candidate for a general audience. Despite this, it was a screenplay that was mused about for years, and there were fans who referred to it as Gil Kenan's FNAF. But considering the information we got later, that was very much not the case. The Misfit Kids screenplay doesn't say much overall, but sat as the screenplay for a while before getting scrapped. The protagonist moves into a new town with his single mother. Exploring on his own, he ends up finding Freddy's, and misadventures ensue. Similar to the Pawn Shop screenplay, this followed a similar formula you would see in children films of the 80s and 90s. Despite this, it would have taken place in modern times, and Scott's number one problem was connecting a Gen Z kid to a millennial location without it feeling too contrived. With this context alone, it still sounds like one of the weaker ideas out of all the screenplays, but I understand why it was considered. It feels the most safe. I want you to keep that in mind as we continue. The Ghost Trackers and Insane screenplay would have taken on a more traditional approach to horror, with amateur ghost hunters breaking into an abandoned Freddy's. There are a few of Gil Kenan's inspiration photos we can connect this back to that match the description of this plot. It was a safe route of a story, at least the Ghost Tracker part, not the Insane part, but regardless, it didn't work out. Scott's problem when writing this screenplay was spending too much time fleshing out the characters and not focusing on Freddy's. He wanted something more personal and seamless that the Ghost Tracker story did not convey properly, which makes sense. This idea works more for the lost footage genre or a short film. And I'm sure you guys are already thinking about it, so let me go ahead and address it. This idea is very similar to what we ended up seeing in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, where Michael Afton leads naive ghost hunters into a Freddy's location before they eventually die one by one. Concerning the Insane screenplay, funny enough, this also parallels the second FNAF movie, except instead of the Funtime animatronics, it was the toy animatronics. Honestly, the only difference is the ball pit tunnels, which I personally feel like still has a shot of making it in the FNAF 3 movie, considering Into the Pit has made the presence of ball pits such an iconic part of the franchise now. I think it's really cool seeing how these ideas made it to the final product eventually, despite the production hell. It makes me wonder what elements in the current movies were actually part of scrap screenplays throughout the years.
All right, it's giveaway time. Slater, show them what's up for grabs.
Ooh, we have a Matthew Lillard signed copy of the Five Nights at Freddy's script, first movie.
Jinx. It's free to enter. There's no purchase necessary. Just join our Patreon community. You can join as a free member or paid. Doesn't matter. Just join the community. And you will automatically be entered. There's one entry per person. On January 24th, which is
Matt's birthday,
we are going to do a snapshot of all the members and then put those names into one of those randomizer things and have it pick a winner.
Yeah.
So,
and it could be you.
The rest of the details are below. Check it out. And this could be yours.
Ooh.
January 9th, 2026, GeekGarage would upload a video where they showcased a FNAF X Scream cosplay for Matthew Lillard. Within that video, they would have Matthew Lillard sign a couple of products for a Patreon giveaway. This would include a signed copy of the original Warner Brothers script for Five Nights at Freddy's. The giveaway would end on January 24th, but no news about this script would be revealed until March 16th, where YouTuber Johnny Blocks confirmed a redraw had to be done because the original winner did not respond. More than a decade after his announced role as a director, the world would finally see Gil Kenan's FNAF, the script that so many fans had frothed at the mouth for as they wondered what could have been. I mean, we have seen all the photos he posted, the inspiration he drew from. He had a vision, and it was a lot more eerie and darker than anyone could comprehend. GeekGarage themselves would make a post on March 19th to address the influx of questions they got from the FNAF community, stating they had no idea that the script was such a highly sought out piece when they first obtained it. Within this post, they would disclose they would not share photocopies of the script to follow US copyright law, but shared details of the screenplay based on their memory. Starting off, they would clarify the script they shared was not the Cassidy screenplay, which would debunk the common belief that was Gil Kenan's FNAF. What would be shared was something no one expected.
The story followed a group of 4 nerdy friends who called themselves the Warlocks and made YouTube videos together. After stumbling upon the story of the dead security guard, Mike, whose demise happens in the first few pages, and 5 missing children, the group decides to sneak out to the old abandoned pizzeria to investigate what really happened. Also, the owner was a totally different character. There was no William Afton in the script at all, which is ironic since we eventually had Matt sign it. Overall, I remember it having more of a group vibe, like The Goonies or Stranger Things, with a pretty conventional setup/story and lacked real faithfulness faithfulness to the source material in FNAF lore. Based on Scott's minimal descriptors from his Reddit posts, there are a couple of drafts it could be: F Screenplay, Misfit Kid Screenplay, or Ghost Trackers. It's hard to tell because elements of those three all sound familiar, or perhaps he or I misremembered stuff. For example, I recall the script did have a whole underground workshop and even an underground amusement park, but I don't remember any crazy government project element. I also remember the main kid's family was moving away from their town, and he might have had a single mom. Like I said, the plot was pretty familiar and used a lot of storytelling tropes, so my memory is a bit hazy, as it's been quite a while since I read it.
Alongside sharing a general description of the screenplay, they would answer burning questions from the fans.
Hi, I'm just intrigued about this older version of the movie, but was Mike's last name Schmidt, or was it different? And was Purple Guy's name in this movie Dave Miller, like in the FNAF novel The Silver Eyes? If you could remember his name.
Yeah, it was still Schmidt, and no, the owner's name was weirder than that. Sounded like a grandpa name, like Harold or Howard something.
I'm just wondering, was there any mention at all of Fredbear's Family Diner or Springtrap?
Don't remember any diner, and Springtrap wasn't a character, just the main stage characters really.
This clarifies things a lot, thank you. By any chance, was there a mention of who the purple guy was? His name and personality?
There was, but the name escapes me. I don't think he was in any scenes with the main characters. It was like flashback scenes, or like them watching videotapes, I think.
Do you remember what costume the killer wore to lure the children and kill them? Did he even wear one? And was the owner the man who killed the 5 kids? Doubt you remember, but what were the killer's motives?
Nothing like that was in there at all. Just old news articles that kids went missing years ago, and I think at the end they find a kid's bones inside one of the animatronics.
Again, sorry for being like this, but in reply to another question, you said there was no mention of Purple Man in the story, just of the owner, while in other replies you stated that Purple Man might have appeared in tapes or flashbacks. So which is it exactly? To be clear, I'm not asking if he was literally called Purple Man or Purple Guy, but if he was shown or mentioned in any way. Also, by asking if the owner was Purple Man, I asked if the owner was the kid killer.
The term Purple Man was not in the script at all from what I remember. The owner was definitely on tapes, but maybe also had flashbacks? Again, memory's a bit fuzzy, so I don't recall specifically.
Thank you. One last question. Do you know how it ended? Did it, end with the main character fighting Freddy in the underground facility or something?
Yeah, from what I remember, they're getting chased and fighting them off as they escape underground. And like I mentioned in another comment, I'm pretty sure the place burns down.
Do you think that this script was better than the first and second movie?
Not really, felt kind of generic, like they just slapped the FNAF settings and characters in there. But I also wanted more from the movies that came out. As a director who's done both kids movies and horror, I would have loved to have been able to make a solid FNAF movie, but that's just my personal opinion.
Well, considering everything, the script was dated September 16th, 2016, meaning the script was worked on for roughly 11 months since the public announcement of Gil Kenan's directorial role, before being completed and distributed to other members of the production team. Alongside this date, it would mean this FNAF screenplay was completed before the release of Five Nights at Freddy's sister location, which actually makes sense. GeekGarage confirmed there was no mention of Purple Guy or William Afton within the script, which lines up with the fact the mention of Afton wouldn't actually be till FNAF's sister location.
With all due respect, those aren't the design choices we were curious about, Mr. Afton.
Surprisingly, so much of Gil Kenan's inspiration posts line up with this aforementioned screenplay, including the underground amusement park. Before this information was released, it was hard to draw conclusions about these carnival-themed pictures without thinking about Fall Fest, an aspect of FNAF lore that wouldn't exist until years later. Now, it made sense. The dressed mascots could easily be rationalized as employees working around the park, and innocent photos found by the protagonists of the scrap screenplay, which they considered creepy. Like GeekGarage mentioned, there was such a blend of ideas that it's hard to pinpoint exactly what the screenplay is when using Scott Cawthon's Reddit post as reference. But if I had to guess, it was most likely the Misfit Kids screenplay. Scott did say this was the screenplay for a while, and considering the preservation of the script, that means it held some sort of significance within production. What really trips me up though is Gil Kenan's left without comment post and Hold My Baby, the last post that seemed to have any direct connection to Warner Brothers and FNAF, despite the screenplay having a date for September 16th, 2016. Like I said before, there really isn't concrete information about his left without comment post that has Warner Brothers tagged. Everyone universally agrees the screenplay is a Warner Brothers property before Blumhouse took over. Gil Kenan's departure wouldn't be publicly announced till June of 2017, but that doesn't mean he was taken off the project around that time. It's really hard to speculate the timeline of these events because of how under wraps the production cycle of the FNAF movie was. But regardless, it seems we finally got an answer to a question that haunted the FNAF community for so long. The Warner Brothers Five Nights at Freddy's movie was crap. A title like FNAF was lightning in a bottle for 2014. The quick organic growth for this indie game had never been seen before. And like anything that explodes in popularity, the initiative to expand knocks right at the door of opportunity. A Five Nights at Freddy's movie was a natural route to go, but even with a series of games that were overly simple at the time, padding out a story fit enough for a feature-length film was the greatest obstacle to overcome. It didn't help that the beating heart of this franchise was the group of theorists that stood at the center. Scott Cawthon took on project after project to keep up with an eager community, and as any fan would know, that would be his Achilles heel. His drive to keep expanding led to complexities to a story that used to be simple: a security guard surviving a night against haunted animatronics. Unlike its indie horror predecessor, Slender Man, Five Nights at Freddy's quickly departed from its initial concept 2 years after its first release. And while messy and complex, this would ultimately benefit the franchise in the long run. I can easily see why the FNAF movie took so long to make. The story was ever evolving and changing between 2014 to 2017, and I can see why Scott Cawthon wasn't satisfied with each of the scripts that were worked on. Think about it. If we had gotten the Misfit Kid screenplay, this movie would feel incredibly detached to what we know about the franchise now. It would be an isolated piece of the franchise, similar to how most people view the early 2000s Silent Hill and Resident Evil movies. While people can criticize the FNAF movies we do have, the majority of the community can agree that in the end, those are FNAF movies. They have the core elements of what makes Five Nights at Freddy's Five Nights at Freddy's, and the Misfit Kid screenplay seems very derivative of that. I think the only positive I can give is if we had gotten that movie and it was released in like 2017 or 2018, it would fit in with the popularity of Stranger Things and It, where a young group of kids face the horrors. And while I think a lot of people would have liked that, you still have to admit it isn't an ideal route for a FNAF movie. Gil Kenan and Chris Colombus would have brought different visions to the franchise respectfully, but it wouldn't have been the best fit. Looking at each creative, what they both have in common was their taste in 80s and 90s films. I mean, Chris Colombus directed films that define that era, and Gil Kenan was the direct result of someone growing up with those films. The FNAF movie was originally striving for something that captured those aesthetics, considering the scrap screenplays, but in the end it didn't work for a modern young audience who didn't grow up with those types of films. Tammi as a director was the solution to the problems Scott Cawthon and Jason Blum had faced over and over again. She brought forward a fresh approach that properly adapted this franchise for a modern audience while also capturing the 80s and 90s charm in a visual way. While people can tear apart the writing for the FNAF films all they want, one thing that cannot be denied is the direction. The art direction and balance of both humor and horror that perfectly encapsulates FNAF. That is thanks to Tammi. Nearly every frame from these movies are a love letter to fans, and that's what makes them so incredibly celebrated despite their flaws. Researching for this video, it was just refreshing to see a director who was so clearly passionate about the material they were working with. She understands what Five Nights at Freddy's is, even if the writing isn't the strongest. At least it's way better than what we could have got. And I know no one's really asking for an E-Strange review of the FNAF movies, but I can confidently say FNAF 1 is a decent movie and FNAF 2 is objectively bad, with the best parts being the set design, animatronics, and McKenna Grace. I have strong hopes that FNAF 3 will be better considering the reception of FNAF 2, but one can only hope. The production history for the Five Nights at Freddy's movie is fascinating, and I hope at least this video was able to capture it cohesively. Gil Kenan's posts were ultimately what prompted me to make this video because I remember how ever-present they were back in 2015, as a kid who was hyper-fixated on these games. I can't say I'm even remotely curious what Gil Kenan's FNAF movies could have been, because I think Five Nights at Freddy's just wasn't his franchise. And I don't really have any curiosity about what Chris Columbus could have brought to the table either. Besides, Chris Columbus is Chris Columbus, and Gil Kenan found success in the Ghostbusters franchise, so I don't think they're missing out too much on that Fazbear money. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this topic, and if you have any memories when Gil Kenan's posts were circulating back in 2015, and how many of you were completely unaware of this history or didn't know that it finally got, I guess, quote-unquote debunked after all these years. I want to thank everyone who helped make this video happen. Dux, Bella, J Melky, Corv, Loaf. I appreciate you all offering your voice work to me. Thank you to everyone who has watched this video and returned to my channel after the success of my previous video. I just cannot stress how much it means to me, especially after struggling creatively for so long. Honestly, I can't confidently say that I have the next big video in the works, but if you guys have any ideas, I'm really open to suggestions right now. Either way, just thank you for supporting me on this journey, and I hope to see you guys soon. Until then, eat strange.